All right. John Doyle, famous Subway employee and man who lives with his parents, has made a video entitled, "Why the Left Hates White People." You know, I don't know if anyone has noticed this, but I am a white person, so I'm very interested to hear why I hate myself. I just thought it had to do with my penis, but apparently it's a melanin thing, so that's good. We might save a bunch of money on some surgeries if he can convince me here.
We've heard quite a lot about systemic racism recently in the news and in the media, and so hopefully we're going to get a chance to talk about why that's just not true at all, but we've...
Disproving systematic racism with facts and logic. Nah. Nope.
We've also got a lot of different topics to get through, such as why white liberals hate themselves, whether Republicans can ever get the black vote, why everyone...
Probably because Republicans consistently vote for policies that not only harm minority communities, but show an outright disdain for their existence.
Thinks that fascists are bad, but communists are cool.
The things aren't mutually exclusive. You could be a fascist communist. I'd argue Stalin did a lot of fascist shit, right? You can, like, for instance, you could be a fascist capitalist or a fascist communist. But, at the end of the day, communism isn't intrinsically linked with fascism. It's just often been used in tandem. We see that in, Mao's China, Stalin's USSR, stuff like that.
How Republicans set themselves up to lose with the left's morality, all sorts of stuff, so be sure to watch all the way through. Watch it in parts if you have to, but it's going to be very epic, so do stay tuned.
You think it's his mom holding the camera? Just curious. Mom, I need to film an intro for my YouTubes. Okay, John, I'll be out in a minute. Mom, hurry up, the lighting's right.
John Doyle in. Heck off, commie.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Heck Off Commie. Got a lot to talk about today. Very important video, very important topics. Seems like we've been gone for a while, but that's just the cycle of things. I get stressed out about a bunch of stuff, I get depressed for a few days, and then I come back with a lot to say. And
John, that's sad. I'm sorry you're feeling depressed. Maybe see a counselor? Some people just get sad, but if you're legitimately getting, like, consistent depression, maybe talk to someone. They could help.
It usually makes her...
That's not a joke. I'm not joking. Like, John Doyle, I disagree with him, and I think he's a fashy weirdo, but, like, if you're depressed, you should get help.
A pretty good video, so that's very epic. Might say some stuff that you like, might say some stuff that you don't like, but you're at the very least going to want to watch all the way through. I would not steer you wrong, but I thought that I should first announce the long-awaited and much-requested Heck Off Commie Discord server is just hours away from launching. It's probably up right now. We've got 8...
Ooh, boy! Let's join, shall we? Where is the... Oh, I don't see the Discord. Wah, wah. Maybe he has a link to it on his website? I don't see it. Let me see. What's his Facebook group look like? This is gonna be bad, I bet. God, I hate Facebook. I never touch it. I need posts made by other people. More community. Ayo. Damn. Not a ton. I need to find the Discord server. Where is it? Whatever. We'll just continue the video. I'll deal with the Discord later.
HOC's finest working on it. It's going to be available to members over at heckoffcommie.com. So if you want to join the Discord, you want to talk to the boys and myself about politics, it's only $4, plus you get access to a bunch of other cool stuff.
Oh, it's a private Discord. Lovely.
book recommendations and to get to vote on video topics, stuff like that. And it helps support the channel, which of course is very epic. We've also been doing Zoom call lotteries for members where basically a bunch of us just hop into a Zoom call and talk about stuff because we got to stick together. Got to take care of each other because no one else will. So that's epic. But yeah, I wanted to talk about race in America today, about the politics of racism, things of that nature. And these are things that are considered to be controversial by people online who aren't actually living in the real world or who just want to like clutch their pearls at everything you say to try to make you look bad or look like a bigot, maybe get you deplatformed in the process. But I actually had a conversation like this at a grad party a few Sundays ago with a young lady who is very liberal, very far left. And I never drink. I don't like drinking, but I'll do it if I know it's going to be funny. Like if I'm going to drink, it's going to be to the point where it becomes someone else's problem.
Oh, that's not healthy, John. Like, there are different kinds of alcoholism. Even if you don't drink often, if when you do drink, it's to excess, that can be a form of alcoholism. That's not good.
So at the time I was like, yeah, let's get wasted and bring up Black Lives Matter to the drunk white girls who have been spamming social media.
Oh god, John's a drunk uncle in waiting. He's just gotta get older.
To end racism for the last 2 months. And for some reason, I can actually articulate myself better and at a faster rate when I'm drunk. I don't know why, but anyway, so I'm talking to this girl for like an hour, and it concluded with her saying, you know, I'm too messed up to have this conversation right now, but I just want to say that I agree with like 90% of
Furia Ferna, thanks for coming to the stream.
what you just said, and I'm sorry for misjudging you. And then Proxy Cameraman Matrix just stands up. He's like, the final red pill, John is reasonable. And I just thought that was very funny. But I also think the whole conversation is pretty emblematic of where we are as a country, because the people...
He's Ben Shapiro when he's drunk. True. Maybe literally, maybe that's like, it's like a Jekyll Hyde thing. When he's sober, he's John Doyle, but when he gets drunk, he just wakes up in Ben Shapiro's house, and it's him, and he's has a whole other second life. He's married to a doctor, but in his sober life, he works at Subway.
Who are the most invested in these narratives, whether it's Black Lives Matter or whatever the civil rights movement of the week is. These people are always...
Civil rights movement of the week. Black Lives Matter's been around for a decent while at this point. It's more popular now than it's ever been, but it's been around.
He's incredibly...
And also, this is just a continuation of the same civil rights movements that happened in, like, the 60s. It's not new.
Emotional. They are visibly invested emotionally into these things, and those who are inclined to agree with these narratives might mistake that investment as passion. And I'm sure that there are a lot of very passionate people fighting on behalf of these narratives, but really what it comes down to is that these people are hurting on the inside, completely irrespective of the problems which these narratives supposedly seek to solve. It's not a coincidence that these people will attack you, ostracize you, just act viciously towards you, but then if you get them a little drunk, you find out that they're deeply insecure about themselves.
I think everyone's pretty insecure about themselves on some level, right? That's fine.
Feel as though their lives have no meaning, etc. And that's one of the cores of liberalism. That is one of the largest predictors of a person identifying as left-wing.
John, how many liberal people have you ever gotten drunk in your entire life? I don't imagine you get invited to many social gatherings. So this anecdote of one person getting somewhat tipsy in front of you, even if she was sloshed, and her being insecure, says nothing to the validity of the people who are on the same side of the political spectrum as her. The projection of her insecurities onto everyone is ridiculous and baseless.
Which is their level of insecurity. If you're insecure about yourself, you have a negative perception of yourself, maybe rightfully so. You know that you're not going to fare as well in a competitive system compared to someone who's confident and capable, but you still have an instinct to survive and to achieve what you believe is the best case scenario for
Mock Turtleneck, thanks for gifting 5 subscriptions. I appreciate that.
yourself, whatever that may be. And so that would compel you to gravitate towards something like a system that can supposedly ensure equality and egalitarianism. And on top of that, it's a matter of identifying with struggle. What really woke me up to this was seeing one of my friends, a tweet from one of my friends a couple years ago. This guy was never really into politics at all, but he did have some self-esteem issues since he didn't really have any goals or interests or anything like that. He was out of shape.
What is with this idea that confidence and competence go hand in hand? There are some people who are incredibly confident with no skill, and some people with a decent knowledge base and ability level that question themselves constantly. This is the oh shoot, why am I blanking now? the whatever effect. Someone let me know. I forgot. I use it all the time, but I keep forgetting. The Dunning-Kruger effect. Thank you very much. That's what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, and it affects literally everyone.
Shape. And one day, I saw him reply to a tweet talking about, the families being separated at the southern border. And he said something like,
wait, why did he air quote families? They're families, and their children are being taken away from them and never returned. There's no this. It's their families, and the children are being taken away and not returned.
The people replying to this saying that it's a good thing have never had to face any legitimate struggle in their lives. And it clicked. It's like, that's what it is. These people are projecting their internal struggles and insecurities onto these movements because they believe that they understand the struggle that these groups believe that they're facing.
John, do you understand what empathy is? Empathy doesn't require that you literally feel that you have faced the exact same struggle as someone else. It's the ability to look at a situation that someone else is in, for instance, someone who's trying to bring their family over from Mexico to live a better life, and saying, oh wow, they're being not only arrested, but their families are being ripped apart and their children are being taken away and putting into detention centers for months and months and months at a time while they're being treated poorly, and that's disgusting. That's evil. It doesn't require me to have lived that experience to understand the living nightmare that is. John, give empathy a shot. It's part of the human experience.
And because it gives them a sense of purpose in their lives. And we know that left-wing people already have much higher rates of mental illness than do right-wing people, but human beings gravitate towards struggle. We need something to fight for. We need something to conquer. And when you've had everything handed to you, you almost have to create your own struggle by convincing yourself that you're part of like freaking Dumbledore's army, but you're not. You're not part of Dumbledore's army. That's why there's so many rich white kids out there doing this, especially the affluent white liberal females, the dregs of society.
Females. You can just call them women, John. You can just call them women. It's less weird.
The single...
And also, on what are you basing the fact that the picture that these two are wealthy? Like, why do you assume these two are wealthy? I don't know who these people are. She has a phone. She has a phone. But, like, everyone has a phone.
Greatest destructive force in the history of global politics. Because on the one hand, you've...
The greatest destructive force in the history of human politics. Nazis? Nah. Fascism? Nah. You know what's bad? People who are women getting to share their opinions. Yikes.
You've got Black Lives Matter. And it's a lot easier for Black Lives Matter and a lot more profitable for them to come out and say, hey, these issues that we're dealing with have nothing to do with choices that are made by Black Americans. And it has everything to do with white people and white people being racist.
Holy shit. Literally victim blaming black people for being killed by the police and being harassed by the police. Galaxy brain.
And if you disagree, it's because you're racist. Oh, and by the way, asserting that problems facing Black Americans are largely the result of choices made by Black Americans is less rude than asserting that they are caused by an entire race of people.
No, it's not, because you're basically saying that all black people have it coming, and they're doing things that are causing these to happen, and not that the police, who it's their job to handle situations in a reasonable way, aren't doing so. Like, what? It's on the police to arrest people appropriately, even if they're committing crimes. You don't get to kneel on someone's neck for, like, 20 minutes and murder them, and then be like, well, he had it coming. What? No. The police don't get to do extrajudicial killings. That's not how any of this works.
Because they're racist, or even less human. In other words, if I'm a dick for saying that the reason black men are more likely to go to prison than white men is because they're more likely to commit violent crimes, then you're an even bigger dick for saying it's actually just because white people are all racist.
Why? I'm not saying all white people are racist. I am saying, and along with, again, because I get my opinions on this from people who have lived experiences, not what right-wing people tell me on the internet. The fact that the police, A, over-police minority neighborhoods, B, disproportionately use force against people of color, and C, disproportionately kill them. These are substantiated facts.
But anyways, so on the one end, you have black...
White people also get lighter sentences for the same crimes. You can look that statistic up too. Fun fact. Not fun as much as it is horrifying.
Black Lives Matter, and they can make a lot more money and get a lot more power because remember...
And generational poverty, yes.
They're Marxists by completely and totally absolving black Americans from any responsibility for their actions.
Literally none of that is what Black Lives Matter is about. The disingenuous straw manning is so blatant.
And instead placing the blame on white people, America, and police officers. And then on the other hand, you have people such as...
Pretty sure it's mostly police officers. It's police officers and those who refuse to acknowledge the problems that are actually apparent within our current system. Oops.
The white liberal women and the soy boys going along with the narrative because they have no meaning in their lives and they're
Soy boys? Galaxy brain.
insecure and they want a community that they believe can resonate with their self-perceived struggle. That is why women and weak feminine men are the most likely to virtue signal.
Virtue signaling is anything I don't like. If you hold an opinion I don't like, it's virtue signaling. John, have you considered that people just disagree with you? You don't need to come up with a word or use a word that someone else came up with to try and discredit someone's opinion without actually addressing what they're saying. It's the most ridiculous dodge I think people on the right have ever come up with. Virtue signaling. I don't want to actually address the point you're making, so I'll just say you don't actually mean it. It's presuppositionalism for right-wingers. That's not... In fairness, a lot of Christians use presuppositionalism are also right-wingers, but I'm talking specifically politics.
If you are physically weak, you're high in agreeableness, then you need people to like you because if they don't like you, they're just going to walk all over you. And so they pathologically virtue signal so as to advertise themselves as the most noble, most virtuous people in society, literally as this sort of like...
John, people just like being moral beings and like to share their opinions with others, especially in a world where social media is such an important tool in changing hearts and minds, in changing the opinions of society as a whole. So if you see, for instance, a ton of people saying, hey, look into this police violence, look into the fact that police get away with murder, look into the fact that police disproportionately hurt people of color more so than white people who commit the same crimes, and a bunch of people say it, it's effectively a signal boost, and other people can look at that and change their opinions or get to know the issue. That's a good thing. That's not virtue signaling, it's effective messaging, and I think you just don't like it because you know it's effective. So, maybe be a little more genuine in your arguments instead of just getting mad that the left wing is better at messaging than you guys.
quasi-survival instinct to try to put themselves in the most optimal
Oh, the lupine emote got approved. Nice.
position possible. And so the reason I bring this up is because someone like me or you would have a very difficult time having an honest conversation with these people because they don't want to leave their mobs, and because any concession on their part would require a consideration of the fact that they're not actually that virtuous and what they're doing isn't actually that groundbreaking, let alone making any progress towards actually solving the problems. You would literally have to get one of these people one-on-one and probably a little bit drunk for them to really tell you what's on their mind. Virtually everything else is just public display.
John, if you want to get drunk with me and have me yell at you about what a fascist you are, by all means. We both live in Michigan. I can pick you up after your shift at Subway is over. We can drive to your mom's house and just get hammered. Sounds great.
And that's actually pretty dangerous for people like you and me because when you're that emotionally invested into something, because your entire sense of self is derived from it, you're not looking at the opposition as a human being who just happens to disagree with you.
Wait, that's exactly what you're doing. You're saying that people who disagree with you are virtue signalers and insecure and using things like Black Lives Matter to make up for the fact that you think that they're insecure. You're doing that. John, that's what you're doing.
You're looking at them and everything that surrounds them as an enemy that has to be leveled and buried. And we are just now starting to see how dangerous that actually is. And I don't think...
I don't want you to be leveled and buried. I just think you're wrong, and I'm going to advocate for policies and positions that make sure what you believe aren't brought to fruition. Because again, John, not only are you a fascist, but you don't think women should have the right to vote. So, yeah, as someone who believes in, like, society that has an open democracy, you are bad, and your positions are shit, and deserve all the ire that they get. Ooh, that rhymed. I guess I'm a poet, and I didn't even know that.
I think it's going away anytime soon, unfortunately. And that's why one of the things I've been saying recently is conservatives really need to get away from this whole, wow, look at these crazy...
He has said that. He said that women getting the right to vote, in a video a while back, he has said, like, women getting the right to vote is one of the greatest mistakes of the 20th century. You know, not the Holocaust.
Liberals, haha, so triggered. It's just a political disagreement. What, you don't want to sit down and have a conversation with me? You don't want to have a dialogue with me? No, they don't. The ones...
None of you actually want to sit down and have a reasonable conversation. Stop acting as though your concern trolling is actually an attempt to have a good faith conversation about the issue. All you want to do is waste people's time, and when actual statistics get brought up to you, you will ignore them or not read them. So, please, for the love of God, stop acting like you are the good faith people in this argument. You aren't.
In your neighborhood want you off their social media friends lists, and the ones out there rioting in major cities want you dead. Do not think...
Does his mom know that? I guess it depends on how soundproof his room is. I don't know if she can hear him.
Think for a second that they would let someone like you or someone like me live in their utopian society. So it might be time to stop sharing infographics on Facebook.com about how many people have been killed by communist regimes and realize that you would be in that statistic. But it's not going to be the government that kills you. It's going to be mobs of people. They're going to show up at your home. You're going to try your best to pick off a few with your AR-15, your $1,200 AR-15 that you customized and built yourself. But at the end of the day, you are going to be killed, and the media will ignore it, and the police won't be there to help you, and the government will do absolutely nothing about it.
John, do you think that this fantasy of yours is just a tad bit hysterical? Like, yeah, are you a racist, fascist, sexist shitbag? Sure. I wouldn't kill you, though, in Minecraft. I just don't want your positions to be brought to fruition. That's it. It's pretty simple.
And I thought that we'd get into this a little bit later, but it fits better now, which is that whenever conservatives are discussing who's really the enemy, whenever we talk about, hey, off the record, what's really going on here? Who's really in charge? We still only identify the enemy within the approved frame. Like, I get emails every day from well-intentioned people with links to these forums talking about how World War II never ended. John, the Nazis have taken over the U.S. government. Or, John, wake
What? No.
up, look at Antifa. They're fascists. And it's like...
Yes. Truly. It's like the end of Scooby-Doo. We pulled off the mask, and it turns out the fascists were really the people fighting against fascism the whole time. What? That's insanity.
I get that. I get what you're saying. I don't like Nazis. I don't like fascists. They don't like me. But if we were really fighting those guys, we'd have no idea about it. You know what I mean? Like, my grandpa served alongside General Patton in World War II, which is something I'm very proud of. So,
Why? You didn't do that.
by the time I was 3 years old, I could tell you that the Nazis are the bad guys. By the time any American leaves middle school, they can tell you that the Nazis are bad and that fascism is bad.
Yeah. So what happened to you, John?
And of course that's true, but it really makes you wonder why we aren't taught the same about communists.
John, people learn about communism in school and the awful things that happened under Stalin. These things are taught. What are you talking about? Not to mention the culture of America and its pop culture in general, which discusses these things constantly. Like the biggest show of the year last year, or maybe it was this year, I don't remember, was Chernobyl, which had huge themes about how scared everyone was in the USSR. Like, the death of Stalin also came out a couple years ago, and that's a very funny movie. Like, everyone knows these things.
Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, Fidel Castro, or any one of these figures who have...
Like, have you missed the entirety of American pop culture from the 50s to the 80s? Have you not seen Rocky IV? I must break him. Or I must break you. If he dies, he dies. Ivan Drago. So, maybe watch that movie and understand that American culture has talked about the ills of the USSR and Mao and everyone forever. This is not a foreign concept to people.
Have killed millions upon millions more than Nazis or fascists, and I have to stress, this is not a...
No, it's I must break you. Let's take a look.
I must break you.
I must break you. Nailed it.
Defense of those, obviously. The point is that for whatever reason, we're taught that Nazis and fascists are the worst things ever because of mass murder and unprecedented and incomprehensible human rights violations. But we
Stalin was also a fascist. These things aren't mutually exclusive. What don't you get? I would argue the Nazis were, how do I put this, more the... They fit the mold of fascism more cleanly, and they become an incredible example of it. But that doesn't mean that But that doesn't mean that Stalinist Russia and its policies were not also that, right?
learned virtually nothing about the same and even vastly worse crimes coming from communists. And the reason for that is that two of the biggest features of fascism were that it was opposed to communism and that it was nationalist.
That was more specific to the fact that Germany didn't... Oh god, it's complicated. Germany was a fascist state that was anti-communist, and they didn't like the Russians, but they also saw them as a geopolitical threat, for obvious reasons. So, they centered themselves in a very negative, on Stalin and Russia way. Oh, the Surfs TV, thank you for rating, wow. Wow, so many people. Thank you so much. We're talking about John Doyle and the fact that he's mad that communists aren't as vilified as Nazis, because apparently John Doyle has missed the entirety of American pop culture. So anyway, for instance, I'm a leftist. I can say Stalin bad, because indeed, Stalin was fucking bad. It has nothing to do with whether or not we should villainize Nazis, though, because Nazis were also fucking bad, John!
That's right, capitalistic propaganda.
And so for conservatives such as myself, who are opposed to communism and who believe that America should put the interests of her people first,
Spicy takes, I know.
well, now we
In fairness, I did listen to a tanky the other day that was very pro-Stalin, so...
can be accused of being fascists. And we've already learned that the worst thing that you can be is a fascist.
I mean, it's certainly not a good thing to be, John. Are you pro-fascism? Let me rephrase. I know you're kind of pro-fascism, but you at least usually have the mask on, right? So, fascism is bad, and many of the things that Stalin did were incredibly fascistic.
Propaganda.
And pop culture has made that clear, again, from Rocky IV to, like, the 1950s horror film, I Married a Communist. Like, American pop culture is full of this stuff. Mock Turtleneck, thank you so much for gifting 5 Tier 1 subs. Let me see, I married a communist. Movie. Where is it? I married a communist. Was that just the tagline? I need a trailer. Was there a trailer for this movie, or was it just a bad B movie? The Woman on Pier 13.
Capitalistic propaganda.
Oh, it was a novel. Was this maybe the Woman on Pier 13 trailer?
That's right, capitalistic propaganda.
Let's see the trailer for this movie. Thank you everyone who's following. I really appreciate that. Dead man can't talk.
All right. Well, Vanning, I saw what he wanted me to see. Get your hands off her, Bailey. There's a phone in here. Call the police. If you call the police, your husband will be arrested for murder.
50s, the Red Scare, communist propaganda.
Do you have a comparable piece of Soviet propaganda that applies specifically to the Army?
Well, I'd like to show you on that a film of the...
That's them watching communist. Here we go. The Communist Threat. Here's an example of communist, anti-communist propaganda from the 50s.
There's nothing funny about the tools of capitalism.
Tankies do suck, I agree. It's just weird to me that John thinks that America has demonized Nazis, but not demonized communists. If anything, I'd argue after World War II, Nazis became a punchline for quite a while. Like, look at, Hogan's Heroes. This was like a sitcom in the 50s or 60s that involved people, and I'm not joking if you've never heard of this. This was American POWs in a Nazi prison camp,
Nothing funny about
and
the
it was
tools of
like
capitalism.
a sitcom where the Nazis were the bumbling villains. Like, after World War II, America made fun of Nazis. You see this also in The Producers, Mel Brooks movie, right? Whereas communist continued to be demonized all throughout the Cold War. In many ways, understandably, because Stalin was a shitbag.
And so if you're a communist, you're in a nice little position now because no one knows anything about you or your history, and things that would make it harder for you to succeed, such as an opposition to communism or a love of America, can now be labeled as fascism. And we all know that fascism is bad, but
Fascism is bad.
communism isn't. In fact,
No one in America in the general population views communism in a positive light. Now, I'm a leftist. I'm a socialist. I think that communism in theory could work. I think in practice it could work. However, the way that it has been applied in the world, unfortunately, due to fascistic dictators, has given it a pretty bad rap. And most people in the general population, of course, understandably, see communism and socialism through that lens, despite the fact that, of course, the things that Stalin did were incredibly fascistic, right? Same thing with Mao. Killed millions of people. They were fucking awful. And an even smaller amount of people view those things as positive. And we call those people tankies, and they're the worst. So...
in fact, it sounds rather nice. A society where everyone is equal, state-enforced equality. Wait, duh! That seems so obvious. Why didn't we think of that right off the bat? And that's why I hate the term radical left. Trump and a lot of other conservative figures have used this term a lot. And that term needs to be emphasized as a modifier. Like, we need to emphasize that we're not talking about the radical left as separate from the rest of the left. We need to emphasize that the left in general has gone completely radical.
Yes, because when I think about the radical left, I think about Joe Biden? No. The left in this country is very center at best, especially compared to the rest of the world. Of course, now we have younger people who haven't grown up on Cold War propaganda, and while we recognize the fact that the way that certain things were implemented and the fact that the USSR was run horribly by a dictator is bad, perhaps certain socialist or communistic policy changes could be beneficial to society, at least in such a way to make sure that people have equal opportunity, if not equal outcome, right? At the very least, to make sure that people like Jeff fucking Bezos don't exist, who has more money than anyone can spend in a million lifetimes.
And notice how no one cares. Far right. Right-wing extremist. But on the left, nobody panics because...
That's because in this country, when there have been terrorist attacks done domestically, they're typically done by right-wingers. Excuse me. Like the Oklahoma City bombing. Things like that. I'm pretty sure the anthrax scare was also that. No, not that. There was another one. What the heck was it that I'm thinking of? Let me look it up. Right right-wing terrorist attacks. And you also see this today with, like, mass shooters, right? Is there just, like, a Wikipedia article? Thanks, Wikipedia. As of 2020, right-wing terrorism accounted for the majority of terrorist attacks and plots in the United States. Gee, John, I wonder why people are more concerned about right-wing terrorism than left-wing terrorism. Jesus. I'd love to see an example of left-wing terrorism in the United States. And people, like, rioting is not the same thing as terrorism, John. So maybe think it through before you say your words next time.
Because it's all part of the plan. Show me someone on the left who has disavowed the rioting and the destruction. Anyone in politics or in the media. Show me one.
There have been... Jesus Christ. People disavowing rioting. Now, people's opinions on whether or not rioting is... Let's see. Richmond area activist disavows weekend riots. There's one. Jerry Nadler calls violence through Antifa a myth. So, there's at least one. That's what you asked for. There's one. Ayo.
On both
Pretty
Saturday
simple.
and
Google things before you say them, John. People's opinions on the role of violence in various social movements is going to differ, right? Especially in a situation like we have right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, where continually in cities all around the country, there have been protests, both peaceful and otherwise, and in many places, absolutely nothing has changed, right? In some places, literally, like, the mayor has come to march with these people. Like, Mayor, what are you marching for? You're the one who's in charge of the policing system. You don't have to march. We're marching to get your attention so you make the change. So, in a situation where not only protesting is becoming ineffective because people are doing nothing, but when peaceful protest is encountered by the police with violence, we've seen so many acts of violence by the police in the last few months against peaceful protesters. At what point does it become a necessity to ramp things up? I don't know. I'm not going to answer that question because I think it's a complicated question that doesn't have a definitive answer. But I do understand why some people view the need to escalate the situation. It's not a black and white issue.
And the reason you can't show me one is because they're perfectly fine with it. Maybe they don't want to be the ones out there on the front lines getting tear gassed or beating people half to death, but they agree with the ends, and so the means are justified. That's why liberals like Dave Rubin, Elon Musk, and
Did you just call Dave Rubin fucking liberal? What? And Elon Musk, well, I think he uses that veneer of like, oh, I do electric cars and I'm interested in space and I like memes. Haha. Just ignore the fact that I have, just gotten a compensation package 10 times more than any CEO in the country. Hee. Oh, did I just make another $1 billion even though my company isn't profitable? Whoopsie. Here's a meme. These people are not liberal, John. No.
Joe Rogan are being adopted
Joe Rogan, a liberal? What?
by the right as figures. They're
Yes, famous liberal, Jordan B. Peterson.
There's nothing funny about the tools.
This list is ridiculous.
liberals who
Cotton Candy 903 with 5 bits. The police violence this year has been so bad that I had a major anxiety attack and depression spiral. Yeah, it's been crazy. There's entire websites, and I'll show you guys this. Police violence spreadsheet. Someone's been compiling this website. Let me see if I can find a link to it. Backup of all the videos. Is this it? Here is a Google Drive account which catalogs, look at how far this scrolls, endless amounts of police violence taking place on peaceful protesters from the past few months. I'm going to put this in the chat in case you'd like it. There you go. Hello.
You saw that Lupine's emote got
Yes.
through?
I did.
who have rejected the radicalization of the left, but they're still liberals fundamentally, which just goes to show how far things have gone in this country, like towards.
In what way is Dave Rubin a liberal? Genuinely. Is John Doyle just calling him a liberal because he's gay and has a husband? That doesn't make him liberal, it makes him a gay conservative. I think even Dave has dropped the whole, like, I'm a classical liberal shtick. I think he said he's conservative now.
It's the left. And that's why this whole strategy on the right of, well, Antifa are the real fascists, or the left is using Nazi tactics, is so utterly self-defeating, because you're agreeing with their moral framework. You're accepting their TOS. You're agreeing with them that the worst thing ever is fascism, which they only spread because it distracts people from what they're...
Fascism is one of the worst fucking things ever. Communism in and of itself is not. If you have a fascistic communist regime, it would be. But again, fascism is about the methods by which you implement your policy. Communism is just a policy, or a series of policies, not the way in which you implement them.
They're doing, and it makes you, a normal conservative, seem like a Nazi, and then you think you can, like, beat them at their own game? Do you think that you can go to Portland and tell the people torching the city, well, you know, you guys are actually acting quite a lot like Mussolini's black shirts. Maybe if you sat down with me over some coffee, we could... No, they wouldn't listen.
Hey, the government hasn't made the changes that are necessary to reform the police. And again, I think I read an article yesterday, too, that, hold on, rioting, white supremacist. I read an article the other day about how some place the rioting was, like, a thing that was started by white supremacists. Police in Richmond riots investigated by white supremacists disguised as Black Lives Matter. So, just pointing it out. Minneapolis, umbrella man who smashed windows during George Floyd protest was a white supremacist trying to incite riots. So again, stop acting like the majority of people in this movement are inciting riots, when it's not the case.
Listen to you. They wouldn't learn anything. You would learn what it's like to have your ribs cracked by a dozen different pairs of feet, but these aren't fascist tactics. These are communist tactics. How do I know? Because the communists did the same thing, and because these people are communists, or are acting on behalf of communists.
No.
To co-opt their language and their framework is to accept defeat. You are agreeing with their morality, and the problem with that is that their morality does not include your intrinsic value or dignity. They don't have an unconditional view of humanity. Just look at their attitudes towards abortion.
Okay. Abortion is not a human rights issue except in the fact of when the mother isn't allowed to have an abortion. Come on, John. We've had this discussion multiple times, although I'm sure John's never seen my videos. Nonetheless, this has been explained to you many times. Also, the left is perfectly able to recognize that every human being has human rights. However, if you have opinions like John does, for instance, John has said that he thinks that one of the worst things to happen in the 20th century was women getting the right to vote. You don't see the inherent value in human life. Therefore, it becomes necessary to fight against the things that you believe in, because if you are allowed to win, then people's humanity and our collective agency are being denied, right? And that would be a bad thing. So you can have your job at Subway, John, and you can live with your parents and do whatever you want with your life, as long as it's not infringing on the rights of others, and you need to be recognizing systematic injustices that happen within the system that we live in, which is something you're incapable of doing, apparently.
They believe that in order
He did say that, yes.
for a human being to...
And he's alluded to it many times, that he thinks that women are irrational and therefore shouldn't be allowed to vote. Mock Turtleneck with 500 bits. Wow, you're doing a lot of stuff today. Thank you so much for supporting the channel.
achieve personhood, it isn't enough that they are a human being or that they're alive. They have to meet certain arbitrary criteria, whether it be sentience.
Arbitrary criteria? All these leftists hate me just because I don't think 50% of the population should have the right to vote. Do you hear yourself? Come on.
Or viability, etc. And what that means is that being a human and being alive is not enough to afford you your God-given human rights, especially because they don't believe in God or objective morality. And so basically what it comes down to is a subjective view of human value where those in power decide whether those not.
Oh, he did say sentience is arbitrary, didn't he? That's not arbitrary, John. That's a reasonable expectation in terms of a standard for when you should care about whether something is a person or not. I wouldn't even say sentience as much as sapience, although they both play into each other. What?
Not in power get to live based on what is convenient to maintaining their.
What sounds arbitrary to me is when people on the right are like, did you know it? However many weeks they have a heartbeat? Okay? So, a lot of things have hearts. That doesn't mean I consider them human beings.
Their status. And we see this when they support a mother's decision to slaughter her child 4 weeks before
Slaughter.
he's born, since his existence is an inconvenience, or when
It's always so disingenuous when people on the right talk about abortion, because they never do like a reasonable thing, because most abortions take place early on in the pregnancy. Most of them do. Not that it matters that much, but frankly, it is the case. Most of them take place in the first trimester, some in the second, and very few in the third, and it's typically because of medical reasons. You typically don't get that far into the pregnancy without making a decision on whether or not you want to keep or terminate the child. Whatever. Late-term abortions are incredibly rare, but it's the thing they always go to because they believe it has the most emotional impact, despite the fact that they are the least common type of abortion. It's so disingenuous.
and past regimes have slaughtered the political opposition because their existence was inconvenient. It's all the same, and the only thing preventing you from ending up in an anonymous pile of bones is that they don't have power yet. But they're getting there. So the point is,
Fascists, like John, project their want to kill their enemies onto other people. That's why he says things like, oh, the left, if they got into power, would want to kill you. No. Nope. Not the case. Stop projecting, please, John.
is that we have to abandon their moral framework, which has taught us
Old enough to know better. To know more better. Thanks for gifting 5 tier 1 subs. I appreciate that.
from infancy through their control of education and media. We have to stop calling them the real fascists and start calling them what they are, which is militant, anti-white communists. Who are the real fascists? No one. But these people are working on behalf of something with a much worse and more
I'd love to hear how communism is anti-white. Please, explain.
evil record than fascism. And they have a lot of power, and they're getting more of it every year. And again, this is not a defense of fascism. The point of this is that the whole
Mock
reason we have
turtleneck
to
with 500 bits. Thank
focus
you.
on fascism is so people like me and you look bad when we stress the importance of things like putting America first or opposition to communism.
Do I think he actually has a victim complex, or this is in bad faith? That's a good question. I'm not sure as far as John is concerned. He's still a pretty young person. Like, I think he's like 20 or something along the lines of that, so it's hard to tell. I think it's a little bit of a mix of both. I think he genuinely believes some of it, but I think he exaggerates because he thinks it'll make his argument better. Fascists very rarely will argue in good faith, so there's certainly an amount of his rhetoric that is a scare tactic, but some of it, I certainly believe he buys his own bullshit.
And that's why I even have to clarify this in the first place. But a couple more important things to note about the conservative moral strategy. We're going to get into racism as a political strategy in just a second, but a really great example between how the left uses morality versus how the right uses morality is the difference between their branding and their advertising. And this was a point made recently by my friend Darren Beatty during a podcast with Chris Buskirk of America.
Defeating neoliberal moral imperialism. Yes. Folks, don't you know when you post something on your Facebook or your Twitter about how Black Lives Matter, it's literally the same as going into someone else's country, subjugating the people there who are native inhabitants, and stealing their resources for your own financial gain. Genius.
American Greatness, which you should listen to. But anyways, the point is, one of the quintessential emblems of the American right is the Gadsden flag, the famous "Don't Tread on Me" flag. Many of us probably have had one hanging on display at some point or another.
Which is hilarious. I think a modern version of this would be, please tread on me, daddy, and then it would be a cop boot.
And what that flag means is, of course, leave me alone. I come in peace, basically. It's dating back to the American Revolution, and the coiled rattlesnake represents a willingness to defend oneself if necessary. It's basically saying, I don't want to attack you, but if you attack me, then, I'm going to hit you back. Like if you were to step on a rattlesnake and get bitten as a result. Now, what we found out as conservatives is that if you wait until you get stepped on to fight for your country and preserve everything that made it great, you'll end up fighting back at a total disadvantage because you've been crushed with the weight of 70 years of policy that is antithetical to your values. Virtually the entire media and academic establishment and the vast majority of corporate America and the ruling class. And now you're standing up.
Have you considered you're wrong, John? And I'm not trying to make a fallacy here. I'm not saying that because the majority of people disagree with you, that you are inherently wrong. But the fact is, John is wrong, right? He's wrong on gay rights and women's rights and Black Lives Matter. Have you ever for 1 second introspected and considered whether or not the positions you hold are actually congruent with the reality in which we live and beneficial to the people who are affected by those policy viewpoints? Because it seems to me that you've just decided, I'm right. Look, I have posters on my wall, I got a rifle, and a bobblehead of Jesus. I love capitalism. Yum, yum, yum. Like, have you considered that your viewpoint might be antithetical to the majority opinion, not because you're being oppressed, but because you are actively holding positions that would be harmful to people in society? Just a thought.
Brushing yourself off like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. You just made yourself a big mistake there, pal. No, they didn't. You did.
Jimmy Big Nut says, hey, haven't tuned in since 2018. What happened? Came out as trans. So, there's an update for you. Been on hormones for a little over a year, working on my transition. I still have to do voice training, but, I'm working on it.
You made the mistake. You were unresponsive while they took your country away from you because you were operating under the insane assumption that something as great as America could be preserved with a handshake. You were a mighty rattlesnake. You were the best in the world, and you watched them begin to dismantle your country, and you said, hey, knock it off or else I'll bite you. And they were like, let's equip
How is your country being dismantled? Be specific.
Ourselves a bit better before we go all out. And so now what's happening is they control literally all of the relevant infrastructure in the country, and you, the rattlesnake, are just waking up to this, but before you can even get yourself in striking position, they just come at you with a 10-foot tree pruner and just cut your stupid rattlesnake head off. You're no longer a threat to them. Now you compare this to the recent branding on the left and the moral imperialism that they have. They've been
Jouster Zen, thanks for the 100 bits.
Things like white silence is violence. And what that statement means is if you don't fight alongside us, you're bad, and you are the enemy. It is akin to violence.
Yes, it's the view that not actively understanding and being an ally to people who are lesser off, who have been disadvantaged due to some arbitrary thing like the color of their skin or the community they grew up in, that is violence. Standing by while oppression takes place is being culpable for said oppression. Now, you can disagree with that if you want. I don't. I think it's true. I think that people have been complicit in the violence enacted upon minority communities in this country because they just sit by and watch it happen and don't use their power to vote and voice their opinions in order to help. I think things have gotten better. I think the Black Lives Matter movement, which has gotten so much more popular in the last year because of all the obvious, shows of violence by the police, I think those are good things. It's good that people are realizing that allyship is important.
And if you look at this purely from the perspective of rhetorical strategy, which is something that the left is vastly better at doing than the right, it's a powerful message because it asserts itself. It's saying, this is correct. It is imperative that you not only agree, but that you also support us, because otherwise...
Are declarative statements fascism? What a bold take.
You're a bad person and you're complicit in violence. And so when you compare that to something like, hey, just don't tread on me. Do whatever you want, man. It's all good. Just don't tread on me, Do whatever, though. It's easy to see why the left...
Yes, conservatives famously leaving people alone. For instance, of course, they totally wanted gays to be allowed to get married. They totally are okay with trans people being who they are. They're totally cool with interracial marriage back in the day when that was illegal. Yeah, conservatives, famous for keeping their nose out of other people's business. Genius.
To wins. You look at what's happening in your country, you know it's wrong. Maybe you're not too sure about things like fiscal policy or foreign policy, but you know that you are correct on American exceptionalism, on the realities of biology, on the value of human life, the importance of preserving the innocence of children, the importance of preserving America, which means preserving its culture and its heritage. You know that. These are not up for debate. They're the very foundation of our country and of our way of life. And given that, you have to defend them with the...
There are a lot of things that were the foundation of our country that we're better off leaving in the past. Slavery is a pretty good example of this. Killing tons of First Peoples and taking their land. Like, it's okay to admit that despite the fact that the Founding Fathers had a decent amount of good ideas in terms of a set of rules for governance, they also ended up, you know, capitulating to the South and agreeing to things like the 3/5 Compromise. Not good. No bueno.
The same aggression and drive that the left is using to destroy them. No more watching Fox News and making jokes about, well, this is what happens when everyone gets a participation trophy. No, you actually have to be active now. We don't have time for anything else anymore. You have to defend America.
Sounds like you're trying to incite right-wing riots, John. You notice the hypocrisy there? Kind of funny.
With the same energy, drive, and confidence that the left is using to destroy it. Otherwise, we lose. That's why we've been losing. We know that we're correct, but being correct isn't enough. You actually have to fight. No more, don't tread on me. We're replacing that with, actually, I will tread on you. As a matter of fact, I think I will tread on you because you've been treading on us for decades now, and I'm not exactly a fan of channel surfing between, hey, look, we're abusing children, but it's colorful and we're zany, so it's okay, and this just in, people who hate America burn down more great American cities.
Oh no! The statue was taken down and someone threw ketchup on it. The statue won't do the freedom if it has ketchup on it. It's a fucking statue, John. Who cares?
And destroy more tributes to great American heroes. No one has done a thing about it. Now, back...
Or as I like to call them, slave owners.
To Trump is bad, the show. We need to practice moral imperialism. Not don't tread on me, but abortion is murder. Not don't tread on me, but drag queen story hour is child abuse, etc. You get the point.
Drag queen story hour is not child abuse, John. There's nothing inherently sexual about drag queens. Kids don't even know what drag queens are. They just think it's a woman who's come in and has a very interesting look, and they do a fun little story. It's whatever. Grow up, John.
Point. It's not like we're just arbitrarily deciding morality and enforcing that. It's not our morality. It's objective morality as defined by God, and that's the fundamental difference.
Oh, we're going for theocracy now, too, on top of it. And as we all know, theocracies around the world aren't fascistic at all, and always turn out super well for those who live in them.
We're serving God, and they're serving themselves. They are militant, anti-white communists, and that's the other thing. This is...
You know, the last time we heard people shouting about, you know, people being anti-white communists and talking about how they have the objective moral right that's given to them by God, I think they were, you know, waving swastika flags and goose-stepping around Europe. So maybe don't, you know, co-opt rhetoric from literal Nazis. That would be great.
This is something I know we're all curious about because it affects a lot of us, but for some reason, very few people on the right will talk about this, and that is the question of why does the left hate white people? Why do they hate white people?
The left does not hate white people. I'm a white person, and I'm not just a liberal, I'm a leftist. Don't hate white people. Not at all.
And I'm not interested in proving to you that these people hate white people.
Oh, wow. I guess you don't really care about having a sound argument then. That's cool.
If you don't understand that by now, then you should open your eyes.
That's a strong argument. I can't demonstrate this thing. However, if you don't agree with me, you're stupid. Very mature.
They're calling for all white people to be killed, They're saying that all white people are inherently racist.
I found 2 tweets on the internet that said kill all white people. Therefore, it's what the entirety of the left wants.
They're saying that white people are subhuman. They're teaching their children to not trust white children. They're saying that we should kill ourselves. They're saying that you're a literal plague on the earth. And in case you couldn't tell, this is not rhetoric that is characteristic of good intentions. This is not rhetoric.
It's also not characteristic of the left in general, whether we're talking about liberals or actual leftists. These are the opinions of fringe weirdos, not something that's even worth commenting on.
That suggests a longing for peace and equality and coexistence. They hate you, and it's because you're white. And you might be wondering, like, why would the left hate me because I'm white? Most of the radical leftists are white too. Well, like, wouldn't that mean that they'd hate themselves? Yeah, that's exactly what that would mean. And that is exactly the case. Let's wind the clocks back to what we were talking about earlier. What causes people to be leftists? Self-loathing, which leads them to hate other white people as well.
Or, as I like to call it, empathy, which has nothing to do with self-loathing. I'm pretty okay with myself, especially after I came out and I'm living my life the way that I want to. I'm fine with myself. It's great. It has nothing to do with self-loathing. I just have empathy for others and understand that people have different lived experiences than me. So when the black community comes out and says, with a mostly unified voice that says, hey, we're being systematically targeted by the law systems in this country, both police and the court system, I don't go, well, I've never seen it. I go, oh, okay, well, you're all, relaying your lived experience to me, so that seems reasonable. And then also seeing evidence to that fact, the countless, unwarranted deaths by police on unarmed black people in this country. It's ridiculous. Come on.
Well, we know that liberals are more willing to murder someone for the greater good if that person has a white-sounding name rather than a black-sounding one. We know that they believe that it is more plausible that black people are genetically superior to white people with regards to intelligence than would be the reverse case. We know that they believe non-white people should not have to pay more for home insurance due to living in a high-risk area, but are neutral about whether white people should. And we know that they would support censoring research showing that white people are more intelligent, more than they would support censoring research showing the same of black people. And we know that they are the only group, white liberals are the only group who on the net prefer other racial groups to their own. And that's talking about in-group bias, which is something that we all have. It doesn't mean that we're bad people. It's just that we tend to have a bias towards...
Steven Neptune Man with 10 bits. Don't a lot of young white guys become conservatives because they're radicalized? And they're radicalized because they're self-loathing? Yeah. Again. Projection.
People who look like us, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to act on that bias. I mean, there's even research that shows that you can develop in-group favoritism between groups of people by assigning them to different groups based on something as arbitrary as a coin toss. So it's pretty easy to make people get territorial and tribal like this. And statistically speaking, black people have the strongest in-group bias, followed by Asian people, Hispanic people, and then finally non-liberal white people. And then liberal white people actually have a net negative in-group bias, which means they literally have a bias against themselves because of who they are. And because the bias is so strong and contrary to what we'd expect and what is demonstrated by literally every other group of people, it's evident that white liberals seriously resent themselves, and it's because of who they are. It's because they're white people. Maybe that's why they've also been found to...
Or, how about this? If we're talking about, for instance, people of color having a strong in-group bias, probably because they feel solidarity with each other. They're minorities in a country that often doesn't treat them well, and that's something that they have an inherent bond over. In terms of white liberals having a negative in-group bias, it could have to do with the fact that I end up seeing people like John Doyle, like Ben Shapiro, like Donald Trump, or whatever, every day, talking out of their ass, being weirdly white supremacist and having an issue with that, and it can create a bias. I don't feel I'm that way because I don't feel like I project that onto all white people, but I could see how that could be the case. You gotta look at things in context without just putting statistics out there without any information about why they might be the way that they are.
Show less sympathy towards poor white people after hearing leftist rhetoric about white privilege, while the sympathy towards poor black people stays the same. They have a bias against themselves, which we would typically just label as low self-esteem, which would also make sense because liberals have much lower self-esteem than do conservatives. And
I would argue that comes out of the fact, and this is, again, completely anecdotal, so take this or leave this, but from the conservatives I've known, including my father in my life, conservatives tend to attract narcissists, and narcissists are incapable of seeing things that are negative in themselves. Everyone who's not a narcissist has some sort of healthy dose of self-doubt. Not to an unhealthy level, but I think we all have a reasonable amount that says, like, hey, I have faults, I have weaknesses, here are things that I'm not good at. Whereas the right tends to attract people who think, I'm hot shit, I'm amazing all the time, I'm the greatest, why would I feel self-doubt? I'm amazing. And that's not necessarily a positive character trait. Thank you, HHHHH9998, for gifting a sub. I appreciate that. Help support the channel.
And you can even shift people's political beliefs to the right by raising their self-esteem before giving them a political opinions quiz. So yeah, it makes sense given that what we know about them, like they basically hate themselves. They're more than willing to sell themselves out for whatever characteristic of themselves is currently on the chopping block. Oh, we hate America now? Well, I'm from America, I'm the worst. Oh, we hate white people now? Well, I'm white, I'm the worst, etc. And
again, they always go to this example, and I've never seen anyone do this. That's not what most people say. You don't have to literally be self-loathing to recognize the fact that there are inherent biases that take place in the country you live in, and you can be the beneficiary of those things, while also recognizing the immorality of that and working to change it.
Evidence to suggest that white guilt, or making people feel as though they've been given an unfair advantage over other people, is psychologically damaging even after controlling for age, sex, income, education, marital status, and also that it has increased over time as we put our children through schools and curriculums that have taught them to hate themselves. So we've got that established. Now we have to ask ourselves, given that the anti-white narrative is well underway, and given that so many white people are being taught to hate themselves for being white, and so many of them already do, like, we have to ask, what does this achieve? Like, what is the purpose of doing all this? What is to be gained by demonizing white people? Well, think about what the ultimate goal is first. The ultimate goal is to completely destroy America as we know it, or as we knew it, and
Source?
transform it in.
I guess I missed this email. Maybe it went to the spam folder that's like, attention all liberals and leftists. It's time to destroy America! I thought they would have CC'd me on that. I'm a little upset that they didn't, but you know. Doing my best here.
Into a dystopian socialist country where those in charge have everything and all the power and everyone else has nothing. But before they can do that, they have to erode the foundations of this country, which have been there since the beginning, and in some cases even before the beginning.
Such as?
And they were put there by very smart and very strong and very good men.
Okay, smart, yes. Strong, yeah. They fought, you know, the British Empire. That's fucking tough and ballsy. Good? That's real rough. Like all people, the Founding Fathers were complex individuals with a variety of opinions. Many of them owned slaves. That's certainly not a morally good position, regardless of the era in which you live. So, I find the idea of labeling any one person as good is usually reductive. Like, the only person I could think is, like, Mr. Rogers, and I didn't know him personally, so who knows?
And they were intended to be preserved by future generations of those same men. And so, fundamentally, what it comes down to is, of those who built the country and of those who have the deepest roots in the country, the vast majority are white people. This is not a controversial statement. This is just the reality of American history. So,
okay, but that doesn't change the fact that a bunch of people who were not white were forced to come to this country in order to provide free labor to a certain number of people within the population, which, by the way, even if you weren't a direct slave owner back then, benefited you by lowering the prices of goods like cotton, because the labor didn't have to be paid for except for a one-time purchase of the slave, but even that becomes self-perpetuating at some point because slave owners bred their slaves or allowed them to marry and then continue to keep their children as slaves. So, human beings were effectively used as capital, and because of that, they are fundamental to the building of this country. Like, that's just true. I don't know what to tell you other than that. Just because there weren't people of color at the Constitutional Convention doesn't mean that a lot of people who were there, including Thomas Jefferson, who then became the president later in life, weren't there because they built their little empires off the backs of people of color who they had enslaved. Like, come on.
To answer why do they hate white people, it's because the people who have the greatest incentive to preserve our country are going to be the people who have the deepest roots here. And this doesn't mean that people whose parents came here 40 years ago can't love America or that they don't want to preserve America. It just means that because of the history of the country, the vast majority of the deepest roots in this country are going to be those of white people.
Not necessarily, and it doesn't even matter. Who cares? I don't care if your father, mother is related to someone who came over on the Mayflower. It is irrelevant. If you're American, you're American, and therefore you have a vested interest in the future of the country.
And that's just because, historically speaking, this country was basically biracial. We were never diverse like the left claims. We had Northern European white people and we had West African black people. But there were lots more white people than there were black people. And so the strongest force that these militant communists will face is going to be the force of the roots which are buried the deepest in American soil. And the majority of those are the roots of white people. And again, this doesn't mean that non-white people can't love America, or that they don't want to preserve America, or that their families haven't done so for generations. Of course, that's all true. It's just to say that if the left can successfully demonize an entire race of people, they won't even have to go after the patriots of other races, because by that point it'll be too late. Like, they'll have so much power that they can just completely crush their opposition. So when I see some of these students coming to attend American universities from other countries and they're talking about how evil America is, how America has to apologize for doing things less evil than their country or most other countries,
Being the lesser of some evils doesn't make you not evil. I'm the ambassador with 100 bits. I want to know what schooling he's gone through, because my schooling was pretty pro-American. Agree.
about how, oh, America has to be more like my country. And it's like they've been here an entire semester or maybe even an entire undergraduate education. And I think introspectively about how my roots go back in this country hundreds of years.
Doesn't matter. Who cares?
The things that those people fought and died for and built to be passed on to future generations, including myself, not to be taken for granted. How my bloodline has been within a 250-mile radius of where I am right now since 1659. And it's like, yeah, over
Probably some inbreeding in that family. That makes a lot of sense.
my dead body. But that's what the strategy is behind white hatred and behind racism in general. Racism doesn't exist in contemporary America as much else than a political strategy. We're taught from infancy that we're racist, or that our country is racist. Its institutions are racist. Its history is racist. How do we fix it? We don't. We replace it with something more progressive, more 21st century, with something more committed to equality and egalitarianism.
Oh no! Equality and egalitarianism? Yeah, that's good, John.
This is all despite the fact that, legally speaking, the least privileged group of people in this country are straight, white, Christian, conservative men.
How?
Me and you, big guy, the forgotten gamers of America. But none of that matters because
Nothing funny about the tools of
Gamers aren't oppressed, but I wish they were. MW1642, thanks for gifting a sub.
their fixation on racism is not out of a commitment to justice. It's out of a commitment to victory and domination. If they actually cared about racism, they'd call out the overwhelming amount of anti-white racism that we see every day in our media and that we hear
Such as,
every day in our classrooms. But they don't, because
like, oh no, Nick Cannon's a weirdo. Yeah, Nick Cannon said some dumb, weird, anti-white, anti-Semitic shit. That's not the prevailing opinion in this country. There aren't systematic issues that are dismantling, like, or making it difficult for white people to get ahead.
they actually endorse it themselves. And so conservatives need to understand that racist is not a real word with a real meaning.
It is? Let's take a look, shall we? Racist. Definition. Webster. By Merriam-Webster. Since 1828. That's a pretty good one. That's old. Their bloodline runs pretty deep. That seems like something you're into for some reason, John. Just so. Definition of racism. A belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. 2. A doctrine or political program based on the assumption of racism and designed to execute its principles. B, a political or social system founded on racism. 3, racial prejudice or discrimination. So this has a meaning. And if you are a racist, you are perpetuating any of these things. Or believing any of these things, right? Okay.
Racist just means shut up. That's all it means. Virtually nothing more. But what conservatives like...
Imagine being so introspective that you're regularly called a racist, and literally at no point have you gone, I wonder why. Oh, hype train. Thank you, everyone, for the various stuff that's getting us to the hype train. Rising Phoenix with 100 bits. I hate to break Mr. Doyle's delicate-y, lily-white bubble, but American exceptionalism has been taught for decades. Yeah, I know. It's ridiculous. MW1642 with 100 bits. Trevor Belmont, XXX with 100 bits. Thank you very much.
To do because we've lost so much in the last few decades that we get excited by even the smallest potential victories. So when someone calls us a racist, we go, now wait just a minute, I'm a racist? All right, why is that? Provide some evidence for your claim. And you've got this smug little look on your face because,
Jousterzen with 100 bits and Mock Turtleneck with 500 bits. We're almost to level 1. Bellstar with 100 bits. 6 hours till I'm free from student debt. Fuck yeah. Get that yoke off your neck. That shit's ridiculous. Thank you. Ooh, level 1 complete. Anyone who's here from the raid, when I do levels of the hype train, I put hats on.
You think you're winning, or you know, if they'll insult you, you'll say, well, if you're insulting me, it's because you can't beat me. It's like, except they are beating you, and they've been beating you. And why is that? Because, well, you've ceded ground to them. You've accepted their moral framework because you think that you can outfox them within it, but you can't. The response to someone calling you a racist is not to debate them on whether or not you're a racist, because the second you do that, you lose. The conversation has been totally derailed. The correct response is to tell them to F off and to go about your business.
There's
you're never
nothing
going to
funny about the hats of communism.
You are wasting your time because
Mock
you're agreeing
Turtleneck,
with
thanks
them
for gifting a
that
bit,
being
and
racist
Tentacle
is something that is a serious problem in American society. You're dignifying what they've said to you with a response. And that's idiotic. The same thing with the predominant conservative strategy now, which is to point out that the Democrats are the real racists. There was a resolution introduced into Congress recently to ban the Democrat Party because its history of supporting slavery, because the Democrats are the real racists. And yet again, Republicans
completely ignores the Southern strategy and the fact that the parties effectively flipped platforms and positions in the past, around the time of the Civil Rights Movement. Freezerburn subscribed and says, 3 months with Hannah? Heck yeah. You've been a hero of mine for years, and you being so open about your transition has made me come out and start my own transition. Congratulations. I'm glad. I'm glad you can be open. It feels nice, doesn't it? Cake Earner, thanks for gifting 5 subs. Level 3, almost. Okay.
Republicans are too stupid to understand that they're committing suicide. They're playing right into the left's hand and moral framework, and they think that they're going to win, but they lose every time. Do you think anybody gives...
It's because the right's bad at messaging? Well, how do I put this? They're good on certain messaging. They're good with, like, little phrases like lock her up or make America great again that can get, like, angry people on board with their positions, but they're bad in long-term messaging. It's why they constantly lose things like gay marriage becoming legal, or trans people being seen as human beings, or interracial marriage, or the civil rights movement. That's why. They're consistently bad at moral messaging and understanding that most people have empathy for others. So, it's pretty simple. Am the ambassador with 100 bits. So if there are 2 resumes with the exact same credentials in this world, the one with the traditional white name will be overwhelmingly looked over and not accepted. Funnily enough, it's exactly the opposite. There are studies on this. Wolks Costerwary with 50 bits. Skywise 8 with 100 bits says recently came out as trans. Life is getting a little bit better. It just keeps getting better and better, let me tell you. I am so much more comfortable and less anxious and depressed than I used to be. It's like bananas. Let's see, 1, 2, 3 hats so far. Political parties change over time, and because of idiots like this, I will continue to shove graphics like this at my students. Let's take a look. History of political parties in the United States. We had the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. George Washington, I think, was a Whig, but that's because that was a political party in the UK. And, of course, the United States sort of mirrored their political parties for a bit. But then we had the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. The Democratic Republicans tended to be Southerners like Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and the Federalist Party was people like John Adams, Alexander Hamilton. They were more in favor of stuff like, central bank, basically having more federal power, whereas the Democratic Republican Party was more in favor of having more like a republic of states that worked together, but they were more independent. Mock Turtleneck, thanks for gifting 5 more Tier 1 subs. Wow. This is a crazy hype train. Thank you. Gotta find more hats. 1, 2, 3.
There's nothing funny about the tools of capitalism.
5. That'll work.
There's nothing funny about the tools of capitalism.
Sorry. There we go.
There's nothing funny about the tools of capitalism.
Anyway, so then it looks like the era of good feelings, which seems to be that the parties sort of came together and were more or less sharing a platform. Then we had the second party system where we had the Whigs and the Democrats. That went on for a while. The Democratic Party then in the 1850s to 1879. Oh shoot, I don't have water. Hey Baja Blast, if you're listening, could you come bring me my water bottle? I don't know where it went. So we had abolition and anti-abolition between the Whig Party and the Democratic Party. Third party system, 1854 to 1896. We had the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. This was the birth of the two systems. Then, around this time in the 1930s, they basically swapped. The Democrats became the Progressive Party, and the Republicans became the Conservative Party that were anti-New Deal and stuff like that. Then we, of course, have, oh boy, the modern Republican Party, which was born out of sort of opposing the civil rights movement, adopting sort of policies that the Christian right would agree with. And then even now, more recently, we had stuff like the Tea Party movement. But politics are complicated, and the parties have not stayed the same over time. They've changed quite a bit. So, let me see if I missed anything. Mock Turtleneck, thanks for gifting another sub. XXX Trevor Belmont, XXX 50 bits. Cotton Candy 903 with 100 bits. Thanks, everyone. This is how the show gets made, so thank you so much.
Gives a crap what you're telling them about the Democratic Party of the 19th or even 20th century? That was decades ago. They don't like...
At least he recognizes that, because that's one of my least favorite, like, right-wing gotchas. Oh, did you know Lincoln was a Republican? Like, yeah. Yep. So? That was over 100 years ago.
Like you because they think you're racist now, and nothing is going to change that. They're not looking at it like, who did this to me, the Republicans or the Democrats? They're looking at it like, oh, it was white people. And the left and the media and the universities affirm that like, yeah, it was white people. And the conservative response is to go, yes, but more specifically, it was the Democrats. They don't care. No one cares. That racist country that they're trying to fundamentally decompose is being handed off by the radical left politicians and by the media and by...
John, what does it say that you think that racism and systematic racism are so fundamental to this country that if you remove those, the country ceases to exist? Like, you can have America and have it be egalitarian and not awful. Why do you feel that it's so intrinsic to the country?
By the universities, and your response is, well, at least it's the Democrats that screwed it up in the first place and made them hate it. It doesn't matter. You doorknob. The end results are the same. Stop recycling old leftist talking points because you think it's going to win you the black vote. Have a seat for this one. It's not pretty. The Republican Party is never going to win the black vote. It's impossible. This is very simply because since black people exist as a minority group in this country, they have emphasized group solidarity in party politics so as to leverage their political strength. This party loyalty is what's referred to as...
Thank you, XXX Trevor Belmont XXX, for gifting 5 Tier 1 subs, Mock Turtleneck for 1,500 bits. Wow. This is a crazy hype train. Thank you, everyone.
About the
racialized social constraint, which is basically that support for the Democratic Party has come to be defined as a norm of group behavior, or in other words, it's just something that is expected of you as a black person, and it's meant to empower the group as a whole. And I have lots of black conservatives in the audience who I know can speak to this, that voting Democrat is just something that you're expected to do as a black American, and something that can get you ostracized if you don't do it. We all know that black Americans overwhelmingly vote for Democrats, but what you might not know is that even black Republicans don't vote for Republicans that often. In every presidential election between 1968 and 2012, black Republicans only voted majority Republican in half of them. Studies have shown that running black candidates as Republicans has basically no effect on getting black Americans to vote for Republicans, and even that blacks who self-identify as Republican only vote for Republicans about 12% of the time.
It's almost like Republicans put off people in minority communities, even those who would normally be allies, because they continually show themselves to be the antagonists of those communities.
That's right.
Very strange. All the hats, Bellstar says with 100 bits. Thanks, everyone. Awesome hype train. Now let me see if I can balance these hats for the next hour while we continue the stream.
Also, black attitudes towards things like gay marriage and abortion were not predictive of black voting, which is interesting because black Americans are very religious people. But with the data that we have available, if you wanted to get the probability of a black American voting Republican to be over 50%, you would have to look at black Americans who self-identify as Republicans and who also self-identify as evangelical Christians, and then who also supported the war in Iraq. And then even then, it's only 65% voting Republican. So what does this mean? It means that for the time being, Republicans are never going to get the black vote. It's just like virtually impossible. And
someday they might if the Republican Party basically completely changes the way that it behaves. In fact, in 2012, I think it was, after Mitt Romney lost the election, there was this post-mortem that the Republicans put out that basically said, okay, here's what we need to change in the party in order to get more votes from other communities, because clearly the demographics of the country are changing, and minority communities, which will someday be less minority than they are today, really, really hate us. So here are the things we need to change. Basically said they need to be less racist, need to embrace more left-leaning policies. But here we are. Look what happened. Now Trump's the president, and it won him some time. But nonetheless, the reality is the demographics of the country are changing. And the Republicans are not doing anything to change their opinion other than getting more fascist. So instead of actively changing their platforms to be more appealing to different kinds of people, they just said, no, we're gonna try and get fewer people to vote. We're going to try and make it harder for people in those communities to vote. It's fucked up. Cotton Candy 903 with 5 bits says black Republicans would vote for more Republicans if they weren't continually screwed over by the party. True.
The reason for that is that there is a pervasive and poisonous cultural narrative within black America that says racism and oppression are the reasons for discrepancies. And the Democrats are more than happy to go along with that for political power, but of course they don't actually care about black Americans. We know.
Or it's because it's true?
That, but it doesn't matter, because now conservatives are in a tough position, because to address and agree with that cultural narrative would be false. But it's also difficult to sell anything else, especially considering how successful Democrats have been. And so Republicans foolishly believe that they can beat the Democrats at their own game by saying, hey, guess what? Democrats are the real racists. It will never work. If you want to bring black Americans to the Republican Party, you can't do it by playing a worse version of what the Democrats are doing. Like, you have to restore order to their neighborhoods. You have to put their families before the families of non-Americans. And you have to emphasize how gay the Democrats have made everything, for lack of a better phrase. Like,
what?
That would be a step in the right direction.
What? In what? Is this middle school? What kind of politics is this? The Democrats are gay. What? That's a ridiculous statement to make. On top of being weirdly homophobic?
But again, even stemming back to block voting as a strategy for leveraging group political power, you're talking about something that is just not realistic. And it's not like I don't care about black people, so I'm just going to dismiss these problems. It's more like I do care about black people, and I think that what you're doing as the left is not only failing to solve any problems, I think it's also making them worse, and I'm suspect of your political aspirations giving the radical policy prescriptions which you've proposed. This is said because we actually...
radical policy positions, like giving everyone health care like every other modern nation on the planet.
Want to solve the problem. We have to identify the problem first, though. And when you pander to black Americans with the left's narrative that you know is complete BS, you're not actually earning their vote with anything compelling. You don't deserve it either. In 2012, Mitt Romney got 27% of the Hispanic vote. Hispanics are the largest minority group in America. They make up about 18% of the population. Mitt Romney got 27% of them to vote for him. Here's an interesting fact. If Mitt Romney had gotten 71% of the Hispanic vote instead of just 27%, he still would have lost. But that being said, guess how many more percentage points of white voters he would have needed to win? 4%. The point of all
That's because there's more? That's because there's more white people in the country. Math is hard, I know, but, like, yeah.
all this being that until we can figure out an actual strategy for appealing to these different groups of people, instead of just doing stupider and more dishonest versions of what the left is doing, we should probably focus on maintaining support with white voters. And then once
I think it's telling that he views that community outreach and trying to care about black people and people of different races would be dishonest from Republicans. At least he's honest about the fact that that would be dishonest, because he knows people on the right don't care about minority communities.
we get into positions of power and we start to get things on the right track again, then we can figure out other strategies, because it doesn't matter if the truth is on your side. If you don't control the media or the universities, which you don't, by the way, then you're not going to win. And if and when we take those institutions back, we can start spreading things like that about our enemies to make sure that they never hold power again, because that's exactly what they're doing to us. But the difference is that the things that we will be saying are true. Then and only then can we begin tarnishing the history of the Democrats. Can we begin consolidating control of the blackmail tapes? Relaxed. You get the idea. But even then, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the inability to view the enemy through a lens other than the one provided by the left, who aren't our friends. Like I mentioned, that immigrant labor.
M the Ambassador 19 says, I said once and I'll say it again. What world does this fucker live in? In my reality, my primary and secondary education was neutral on American history, and the college classes were also neutral. Yeah, my, civics professor called himself Mr. Fox News because he watched Fox News all the time. He was right-wing. Like, I'm not saying that's the norm in academia, but, like, they act like there are no differing opinions in college, and it's so strange.
Labor harms black Americans. And it's true that after Jim Crow ended, blacks were never really given a chance to succeed because of the 65 Immigration Act, and it was harder for them to find jobs that would pay relatively well. But you can't view that through that lens, because your PP gets hard thinking about, well, people coming to America because they love it and they want to work hard. And it's like, yeah, maybe, but we've known for decades that immigrant labor disproportionately...
What planet on this guy is on, I'm not sure, but wherever it is, he's still living with his parents on it.
harms black Americans, but you'd rather tell me, John, it was the Democrat Party and Lyndon B.
By the way, I don't think I mentioned this to anyone who is new to this channel from the raid or anything. I have a YouTube channel where I have all my past streams. I just put it in the chat if you want to check it out or subscribe or anything. Give it a look-see when you have the time. I have tons of content on there. I do Chud Watch regularly, which is this show, but I also do Sovereign Citizen stuff. I just started doing a cringe stream thing that's pretty fun. I do conspiracy theories on Tinfoil Tuesday. So, you know, check out any of the playlists on there if any of that sounds interesting to you.
Johnson's Great Society programs. John, do you know what he said about black voters? It would disgust you. And maybe after I'm done telling you about that, I can tell you about who really founded the KKK. And it's like, please, please, please stop. I know you think you're helping, but you're not. You can't beat them at their own game. You are...
To dunk on conspiracy theories? Yeah. Like, we do debunkings. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Quite the opposite. Yeah. It's like dunking on conspiracy theories.
The poor American teenager walking into the jungles of Vietnam, and they are the
We just did one that's somewhat politically related, that it's a QAnon conspiracy, where there was a QAnon documentary we've been watching, and the final part included literal claims that JFK Jr. is using a time machine in order to help Donald Trump. I'm not kidding.
Viet Cong who are going to tear you apart. You don't know this game. You don't know its rules. You will never win. Turn around and regroup. Otherwise, you're just burning resources. The unfortunate reality of our situation is that identity politics is inevitable. We are living in a multiracial, multicultural society with nothing substantive under which to unify, and as a result of that, identity politics are inevitable, especially because the left has realized how effective they are for consolidating and increasing political power. And that's wrong of them to do. But the problem that conservatives have is that we think that issues can be evaluated and weighed in the abstract without any regard for emotion or lived experiences. We think that everything should just boil down to facts and logic.
It's because you completely ignore the reality of situations. It's because you think, oh, everything's fine. Everyone has equality of opportunity, when that isn't the case, and people can tell you from experience that isn't the case. Nonetheless, you go, well, it must be true. We live in America. We have this flag that says that we have the freedoms. So we must all have equality. You're all crazy. I have facts and logic. No. Nope. Nope. Comes from an incredible place, and you're gonna hate this word, but it's true. Privilege, when people like Ben Shapiro, who grew up in a wealthy family, fail to recognize the reality of the situation in America for the vast majority of the people living in it. Like, come on, John.
But unfortunately, that's just a pipe dream. That's not how human beings work. We are emotionally driven beings. So yeah, it would be great if everyone could set aside their differences and look at things objectively with ink and paper, but that's just never going to happen. So conservatives need to figure out a way to coexist with that, because right now we're trying to fight this consequence of human nature, while the left is running wild with it and just racking up points on us. Like, the problem with Black Lives Matter, according to most basic conservatives, would be, well, all lives matter, not just the black lives. That's missing the point. The real problem with Black Lives Matter is that virtually the entire narrative is a lie. The entire timeline, from Trayvon to Michael Brown, Hands Up, Don't Shoot, it's all a lie. That's the problem.
Yikerinos. Imagine actually looking into, like, any of these issues and being like, you know what? Nope, not an issue. Ugh. And the Ambassador 19 with 10 bits. Has he ever in the video brought up the resume study I brought up earlier, or the fact that black people are more likely to be arrested for drugs? No. Of course not. He ignores facts that go against his already existing beliefs.
And if conservatives could take control of a narrative, they could communicate that better. But it goes back to the Gadsden flag versus silence is violence. As of now, conservatives don't exist to create narratives. We exist to basically react smugly to the narratives of the left, sometimes with facts and logic, as though this is an equivalent or even comparable strategy for winning people to our side, but it isn't. If you want to...
The idea that conservatives, or people on the right in general, use facts and logic instead of just, you know, saying that phrase and acting like their lack of empathy or emotional care for the issues at hand is somehow more reasonable than understanding the lived experiences of actual Americans is ridiculous. Come on. Just because you have no empathy doesn't make you logical. It makes you a sociopath.
To be against something, you also have to be for something. And right now, conservatives basically exist to be against the seductive collapse of our country, but they're not exactly offering up any alternative solutions. And unless that changes, our future looks pretty gloomy. And the plan's not complicated. It was never complicated. It's not the Illuminati. It's not the Clintons. It's an elite ruling class who have unwaveringly imported the third world while offshoring manufacturing jobs so that they could hire cheap labor with the help of the bought and paid for Washington establishment. And not only...
What the fuck? Like, that was quick, but, like, saying importing the third world is literally just fucking Nazi shit. Oh no, brown people are in my country now. Like, okay, who cares? They're human beings, you sicko.
Only do the politicians share in the profits off the mega corporations, they get to use the ever-rewarding strength of diversity as political capital. They now have the opportunity to create and exploit group division for political influence and power, and all of this has led to the complete destabilization of society to the...
This is like some JQ dog whistling, by the way. It definitely sounds like Nazi Jewish question dog whistling. When he says elite, he doesn't mean people like Donald Trump. He means what he views to be some secret elite Jewish people. He's a fucking fascist.
the levels which we're approaching now. We talk a lot on this channel about how the collapsed family structure has led to the destabilization of society.
The hats are because when we do a hype train, for every level of the hype train, I put another hat on. So
that's part of it, but when you're living in a country with literally no unifying principles or heritage or culture or religion or language or even morality, the only thing left for you to do collectively is participate in the consumerist culture. But then even that becomes difficult because they're sending jobs overseas and bringing in millions of people to compete with American families for whatever's left. Like, see how that might be a problem? Conservatives got so excited and caught up in defending capitalism that we forgot to defend America. Because if you don't put America first and you sell her to the lowest bidder in this case, then she won't be America much longer. Who do you think pays for those economic studies to be written? Those studies that prove living in a post-industrial economy is actually good for the average American because we can buy orange juice for 20 cents less. It's all horse crap. There's no such thing as a post-industrial
dog whistle.
Economy or society. Our jobs didn't just magically become information jobs or whatever. They just left. They just went away. They didn't all...
A lot of those jobs have been automated over time because technology has improved. So have some of them been outsourced? Absolutely. Many of them just no longer exist, though. They replaced low-skill jobs with high-skill jobs that are engineering machinery and processes by which to manufacture things, and then the ability to service those machines. So, don't know what to tell you. That's the reality.
Into the information economy, they just disappeared. And the people who financed and made money from those decisions didn't care that towns throughout the heart of America were in the blast radius. The only reason that that information is so easily available and is...
Yeah, that's capitalism. The people you're talking about are capitalists. Welcome to capitalism. When you have free movement of capital without free movement of labor, it's gonna fuck up certain areas. It's gonna happen.
To all of us throughout school seemingly is the only concession that they'll give to capitalism is because people paid for it to be there and they paid for it to be taught to you. The government is not your friend, but you know who else isn't your friend? Billionaires who use the government to hurt you for them so that they don't have to get blood on their Armani suits.
Imagine saying this while holding a laptop that says enjoy capitalism and with photos or with posters that are like anti-communist propaganda. This one's a Nazi one, but this one's like, just saying.
Never forget that. We're getting off topic. See, now I've gone too far. Now they're going to kill me. But I should have just said that everything can be traced back to the Clintons. That's the approved line for conservatives.
Alkarin,
and that's
thanks
what
for
was
following.
so funny to me about when Epstein died. And I did a video about... Well, I was trying to get people to understand that this whole thing is so much bigger than the Clintons and that they basically are irrelevant. And right on cue, I had people in the comments, no, it was the Clintons. And it's like, okay, cool. What are you going to do about it? You've got it all figured out. What's next? You look on late night television shows all over social media, literally everyone, including the mainstream celebrities, were making jokes about how Epstein didn't kill himself. The Clintons did it again. And everyone had a good laugh about it. And I remember tweeting at that time about it. And I said something like, I'm glad everyone's just now coming out to discuss the circumstances surrounding Epstein now that it's a quirky little trend on social media. And it's like, you're going to make that joke and then you're going to go back to watching Parks and Recreation, right? Like you're going to post that and then you're going to be like, hey, honey, what's the Disney Plus password again? And it's just a show.
Excuse you, I can fight against the ruling class while also watching Parks and Rec.
Where we are as a society, how weak and passive.
We're almost done. There's only 3 minutes left of this video, a little less, I promise.
Impotent we are, that something like that could literally happen right in front of us, and the only thing that we can do is make it into a meme or even a holiday sweater so that everyone knows how topical and funny we are. The people who actually killed Epstein, and it wasn't the Clintons, they're not laughing with you when you say that. They're laughing at you because they know that they're untouchable and they know that you'll never do anything about it because you're too distracted. But anyways, see, now I'm really going to get hit. The point that I'm trying to make, or that I was trying to make, is that if you want to appeal to black Americans, then you have to appeal to black Americans. Get what I'm saying? Conservatives think that we can reject identity politics and still get black Americans to flip for us. But to believe that undermines the block voting strategy for political leverage that minority groups, and particularly black Americans, tend to practice. And that belief that we hold ignores the unique self-perceived identity of black Americans. And for the time being, if we ever wanted to flip black Americans for Republicans, it would require us to acknowledge that unique self-perceived identity amongst black Americans. When we have power for 60 years and we control the narratives,
yeah, we can do a cleanse after this.
Then maybe we can get closer to viewing each other as just Americans, you know? But for the time being, we don't really have a choice with identity politics or things like it, because if we sit out, we keep singing the same old song that's led us to this point, we're just going to lose even harder and perhaps irreparably. And I know we said we were going to talk about systemic racism, but we've been going for a while. I don't know. I don't think
Trekkie69, thanks for following.
I have it in me, to be honest. So if you've made it this far, thank you. I really appreciate you sticking around. We'll do it in the next video, the idea of systemic racism. We'll just go through it in detail. We'll just completely tear
Oh God, I can't wait, John. I can't wait.
it to shreds and expose it for the lie that it is. But it's still good that we talked about this stuff, you know? It's important stuff. Hey guys, if you like this video, leave it a thumbs up, leave it a comment.
Okay, we'll do some cleanse stuff. Lord Simpington, thank you for following. We're gonna do a bit of a cleanse. First, let me show you my favorite picture on the internet to look at after a video like that. Nope, not Twitch. Twitter. Sorry. Twitter. Profile. Media. Let me find the photo. Oh, there's the new kitty, by the way. Kitty! Cute. Oh, this was a cool fan art someone made of Jake and I. I wish I looked like that. Although, little anime-y, but, you know. Here we go. There's John Doyle working at Subway, pointing a gun at a camera. Awful trigger discipline, by the way. And yes, that is a real picture that he posted himself. Very badass.